You've probably seen this image somewhere, or in several places. After all, Sandro Botticelli's The Birth of Venus is a classic, and one of the most famous mythological paintings of the early Renaissance period. But have you noticed some details of this painting? How the painting looks even more beautiful when you look at them? Also, what's the story behind the scene? Why is this couple blowing it this way? Why does this woman in the center of the painting seem to radiate so much charm? Who's this woman standing on the shoreline? Why is this painting so beautiful? I'm curious to find out. Follow me. In this painting, you see literally the birth of Venus, the Roman goddess of love. She's being blown by the west wind and the spring breeze, Zephyr and Chloris. Both figures have their beautiful large wings, while a curtain covers their bodies. From the faintly painted lines near their mouths, you can see that together, they blow Venus toward the woman on the shoreline, who is preparing to dress her in a flowery cloak. The goddess of love and beauty approaches the mainland, in a place that some say is the island of Cyprus, and others claim is Kythera, one of the Ionian islands. The goddess's right breast is covered by her right hand, and she has long blonde hair partially wrapped around her body and covering her genitals. Venus is raised on a shell as she's carried towards the shore by the breeze of Zephyrus, a wind god, who is holding Chloris, the goddess of spring, in his arms. To the right is a young woman waiting to greet Venus on shore with a robe covered in pink flowers. The identity of this woman is somewhat recurrently debatable. Some believe her to be one of the Graces, while others speculate that she is the Horae of the spring. Notice how her figure appears very light under the grassy shore, as if she were floating. Certainly, she is not human. Let's take a closer look at the goddess. She stands on a giant scallop shell, pure and perfect as if she were a pearl. In the painting, Venus is represented as the embodiment of beauty. Her skin is smooth and milky without any blemishes. Her hair is also golden and long, almost the entire length of her body. But there is something curious about her hair, isn't there? It is because the goddess's hairstyle was inspired by the women's hairstyles of the time when Botticelli lived. The surrounding landscape is impressive, with a certain metaphysical tone, an almost unreal quality, and soft and delicate lighting. Like Pallas and the Centaur, Botticelli's other masterpiece, The Birth of Venus is painted on canvas, something unusual for its time. At that time, most paintings were done on wood panels, but canvas eventually became more popular because it was cheaper. Here, Botticelli uses a fine tempera technique, using diluted egg yolk, which gives the painting an appearance of extraordinary transparency. The surrounding landscape is mostly composed of the light blue of the ocean, which takes up the entire left side of the picture, going towards the right. The blue meets the grassy shore on the right side, which extends into what appears to be a hilly landscape, with several trees in the distance. There is a forest in the foreground on the right side, where the Horae of spring is. Orange blossoms decorate the trees. Other flowers are blown toward Venus as she reaches the shore, including beautiful pink roses with lovely golden details. Look! Notice also how there are other gold details throughout the painting, such as the shoreline where the goddess lands, the shore of the shell where the goddess stands, and the trees and their flowers. It's amazing how Botticelli used soft, earthy color tones so that they complement each other. An example of this is the red drape of the cape that the Horae of spring holds on the right, and the green and blue drape of the cloak that covers the figures on the left. Venus herself is portrayed in lighter tones, directly linked to the fact that she was a symbol of beauty and perfection for the standards of that time. The surrounding landscape is also rich in varying shades of color. It is beautiful how the cooler colors like the light blue of the ocean and sky meet with the warmer, deeper shades of green and brown of the earth. It's interesting how on the right side, there are more shadows around as you get closer to the forest. Furthermore, it is as if you are moving from a lighter side of the composition to a darker side, from sea to land, from birth to life. This adds depth and chromatic balance to the composition. It is remarkable how Botticelli used dark outlines in The Birth of Venus and the influence of lines to create the perspective of the scene. Specifically, the dark outlines around the figures, such as Zephyr and Chloris, with a light background behind them, which is what creates a contrast. This also emphasizes the light tones and beauty of Venus, as if Venus is being worshipped within Botticelli's bolder outlines. The use of darker outlines also creates a lack of depth in the painting, which creates more two-dimensionality. Look at the darker horizon line in the background and the figures that have no shadows. This contributes to the composition being flatter. Depth is also evident in the landscape, as in the green hills and smaller trees in the distant background. This suggests the idea of distance seen from the coast in the foreground, where most of our attention is focused. If you look closely, the horizon line in the far distance is also in a darker outline, and the similar colors of the sky and the sea create more flatness, which makes a little sense of depth where the water and land come together. As for the proportions, the figure of Venus is portrayed with an exaggerated anatomy, where her body is very elongated. You can notice this elongation emphasized in the neck of the goddess and in the representation of her arms, especially in the arm that holds her hair to cover her genitals. Also, her posture is unrealistic, as she is very much leaning to the left side, with nothing to support her body. If the scenario were closer to reality, she would fall. Ouch! Does Botticelli's Venus look familiar to you? Perhaps it reminds you of the famous classical Medici Venus sculpture. Yes, indeed it does, and it is very likely that Botticelli found inspiration in it to create his goddess version. This is clear from the modest way the goddess poses, where she covers her nudity with long blonde hair. Oh, an amazing fact is that The Birth of Venus is the first painting to show a life-size nude female figure, something that has not been done since ancient times. The truth is that the interpretations of this painting are the most diverse, but one of the most common is that here, Venus is seen as an allegorical representation of the arrival of humanism in Florence. Venus, a deity in human form, is welcomed by a mantle of flowers, delivered by the Hora of Spring, who would be the personification of Florence. This concept makes total sense with what was happening at the time. A new way of thinking and perceiving man within the world was emerging. As the Renaissance progressed, the humanist movement also gradually followed. It was also the time when ancient classical texts from the Greek and Roman cultures were being reborn. As for the historical context of this painting, it is likely that the work was commissioned by a member of the Medici family, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, who was a banker, a politician, and a cousin of Lorenzo the Magnificent. There are writings on the birth of Venus dating from 1550 where Giorgio Vasari tells the painting was in the villa of Castello de' Medici, owned by the Medici family since the mid-15th century. This makes sense with the hypothesis that the orange trees in the painting, which were considered an emblem of the Medici family, are an indication of who someone from the Medici commissioned the work. The Medici family was one of the wealthiest in Florence, and they were also avid patrons of the arts, hiring various artists, including Botticelli, to produce artworks for them. The Birth of Venus is also based on popular literature of the time, specifically the works Metamorphoses by Ovid, the writings of Homer, and Stanze per la Giostra by Agnolo Poliziano. These authors had already written many mythological poems about Venus, the Roman goddess of love, beauty, prosperity, and sex. It is obvious that the painting is also inspired by the mythological legend of Venus. According to it, Venus was born from the foam of the sea after her father, Uranus, was overthrown and castrated by his son, Saturn. Uranus was one of the primordial gods, the god of the sky to be more specific. Saturn threw Uranus's genitals into the sea, which mixed with the foam of the waves, thus giving birth to Venus. Just as depicted in the painting, the goddess was born fully grown. The beauty of the birth of Venus is as deep and complex as the ocean, where the goddess was born. Although it is a visually simple painting to analyze and interpret, there are certain details from the early Renaissance that suggest much more. The symbolic meaning of this painting contains several interpretations that relate to Greco-Roman mythology, the Christian religion, politics, history, philosophy, and the richness of late 15th century Italy. For a painting considered simple in concept, the rich details give scope for fantastic imagery. What did you think of the analysis of the birth of Venus? Were you enchanted by such beauty? It's no wonder that this is one of the most famous and fascinating paintings in the world, right? If you want to be dazzled by more beautiful paintings like this one, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and activate the notifications to stay in touch with the new videos. See you next time!